Guten Morgen, sehr verehrte Damen und Herren. Ich freue mich, dass Sie so zahlreich zu unserer Veranstaltung erscheinen und ich sehe, dass wir dringend eine neue Messe Basel brauchen, die dann entsprechend die 700 Stühle da noch erweitert werden können. Für die, die hinten stehen, gibt es noch ein Angebot, dass man hier in der SIA Lounge das per Bildschirm, Großbildschirm verfolgen kann. Und sonst glaube ich, dass die Veranstaltung genug toll ist, um auch die Stehen zu verfolgen. Mein Name ist Christian Blaser, ich bin Präsident der Stiftung Architekturdialoge Basel und verantwortlich für die Architekturvorträge. Die Stiftung Architekturdialoge Basel engagiert sich eben in 4 Gefäßen mit solchen Architekturvorträgen, aber auch mit Architektur wo wir eine thematische Reihe haben bei den Journées d'Architecture und last but not least führen wir eine Veranstaltungsagenda aller Architekturveranstaltungen in der Region. Wir geben einen Newsletter heraus und haben auch eine aktualisierte Website. Auf Ihren Stühlen und Plätzen gibt es eine Karte mit einem Talon, wo Sie sich eintragen können, Ihre Web- oder Ihre E-Mail-Adresse und am Ausgang gibt es so eine Postbox, wo man das einwerfen kann, damit man immer à jour ist in unserer Region über die Architekturveranstaltungen. Alle unsere Veranstaltungen sind kostenlos zugänglich. Zu dieser Sache, wir sind eben eine Non-Profit-Organisation, welche von 8 Architekten geführt und betrieben wird. Die Kosten für eine kleine Geschäftsstelle, Versende, Website etc. werden seit Jahren großzügig durch die Firma Regent Lighting unterstützt und gesponsert. Herzlichen Dank. Der heutige Anlass findet im Rahmen der Swissbau 2012 statt. Die Swissbau ist für dieses Gefäß ein langjähriger Partner und bietet uns die Gelegenheit, solch große Veranstaltungen auch realisieren zu können. Die heutigen Vorträge werden unterstützt durch die Firma Kaba AG, ein weltweit tätiges Unternehmen im Bereich der Sicherheit. Herzlichen Dank den Sponsoren Swissbau und Kaba. Now I'm proud to live in a small city with some big buildings, certainly great architects, and that we are able to organize such events here in the city of Basel. The chosen title, Small Cities, Big Buildings, is an open one. For me, the question how to deal with the scale of planning and architecture in relation with urbanization, density, and our democracy is interesting. How to apply larger scale thinking methods and infrastructure to small scale segregated and confederate countries such as Switzerland or a city such as Basel. What scale and sizes do we need? What is an intelligent infrastructure of place and how do planners, architects and buildings reflect to it? After 3 keynote presentations that will follow with 3 prominent lecturers, 2 architects and an urbanist, Judith Sold, the chief editor of the magazine Tech 21, will discuss these interesting issues in a podium on my side. So now a few words about Richard Burdett, that is starting this series. Richard Burdett grew up in Rome and lives and works from London. He's a professor for urban studies at the London School of Economics, LSE, and a global distinguished professor at the New York University. He is also leading the Urban Age and LSE Cities, a think tank and research institute for urbanity. From 2001 to 2006, he was a councillor of the mayor of the City of London. He was also chief advisor on architecture and urbanism for the London Olympics taking place this year. He was curating exhibitions such as Global City at the Tate Modern in London, or in 2006 the Venice Biennale. His newest publication has the name Living the Endless City. Ricky knows the megacities and their DNA of the world like I think no one else. From New Delhi to Caracas, from Bogota to London. Now we are keen to listen to the first keynote lecture and learn about the versatility of future cities. Please welcome Ricky Burdett.
Christian, thank you very much. Wonderful to be here. I only know about big cities. I don't know about small cities. And I don't do big buildings, but the people after me do. So I'm not going to talk about small cities and big buildings. I'm going to talk about how you make a piece of city through design. And I thought that given the time we have and the need, an important need to have a discussion together, I would talk about, in fact, one project, which is a very important project for my city and perhaps even for other cities, which is the Olympics in London. As you heard a moment ago, I was involved as one of the advisors, not one of the designers, and I thought I would use this opportunity to effectively give a narrative, to describe to you a process, not because I particularly believe the result and the design, Jacques, Vinny, I mean this, is wonderful, but because I think the process may be interesting in how you intervene in existing cities. That's the biggest challenge that I think any designer, any planner, and frankly, any politician has at the moment today. How do you intervene in an existing urban fabric and respect its DNA and build on what I would call the versatility which Christian talked about? So that is what I intend to do, and I hope that you can see on the image behind me the first image that was released only a few weeks ago of the main stadium on the central site in the London Olympics. Effectively, this is a story of how you use an opportunity of an event like this, which happens to have some sports facilities, like a stadium, like a few other things, to make a piece of city. And in a way, I want to come back to that at the end of my presentation as a sort of reflection on the process of design, on the role of architects and on the role of planners, which for too long, I would argue, have actually become parts of different worlds and don't talk to each other. That's very much what we at the London School of Economics have been trying to do in our research program, and I'm delighted that people like Vinny and Jacques with the Delft project and Studio Basel, in fact, doing very similar things. So the problem is, how do you intervene in a city? It happens to be the city of London. Many of you probably know it, but let me explain a little bit what the context is before I go into details. London is a city which still today attracts something like 25, 28 million people in terms of visitors a year. It is one of the three top centers of finance, together with Tokyo and New York. So it doesn't need an Olympics. There's no need for London to attract more people. And in fact, most Londoners say, why the hell do we have to have an Olympics? It's just going to clog the place up with traffic, have even more foreigners. Why do we need that? Well, I think the whole project is about this image. It's about rebalancing a city which is socially unequal. Basically, London, like many cities around the world, has a rich west and a poor east. And what you see here is a view from the Norman Foster Gherkin, as it's called, in the middle of the financial hub of London, the City of London, looking east out towards the North Sea, effectively, along the River Thames, where a second center of finance, known as Canary Wharf, stands. And it's all the area from that point on, as you keep on looking to the end of the picture, which for about 30, 40 years has been in a state of really quite depressed dereliction. You can see this story again on this aerial view with the River Thames. Let me just point to it because there are one or two important things. With the River Thames winding its way through London, with the central area of London more or less over there, Heathrow Airport over here, you can actually see it, and the vast Thames opening out towards the Thames and the estuary over here. You will have maybe read that there's now a proposal to rebalance London in terms of air traffic and build a whole new airport over here in the Thames estuary. That's part of a project, a very, very big and important project about rebalancing London. And the site for the Olympics, as you see, is right at the heart of that part of East London. Now, as a social scientist, and so far as I work at the London School of Economics, I'm interested not just in architectural form and urban form, but also social processes and what the city is like from a social point of view in terms of its DNA. And this image, and you again see the River Thames over there as it winds its way through London going east, this image shows you very simply social deprivation. The darker the color, basically less educated, less good health, and lower income. And you can see that there's a large amount of concentration of, let's call it this poorer area, more deprived areas, roughly to the east and partly to the south. So basically, we use the Olympics as an excuse, an architectural project as an excuse to kickstart a very long-term process of change. I've already said that West London is well known. These are the images of the Royal Parks in Hyde Park. West London, everything to the left-hand side of those big images I showed you, on the whole is wealthier, more established, for many, many reasons. One of which is that East London, instead, because it was on the port, like so many other cities, Rotterdam and many others, is where the working classes were attached to the industries related to the river. When, brutally in the 1970s and 1980s, containerization stopped the jobs and created something like 500,000 unemployed people, the area went into a further state of decline. Completely natural process, you might say, that we understand in cities, United States and in Europe. So the question is, how can you use a project like this to rebalance the city? And that's the narrative that I want to describe. And this is a view of East London, in fact, a few weeks ago, where you see the main stadium of the Olympics sitting in a sea of not very attractive social housing. And that's, in a way, the balance and the challenge of this project. But just to put a finer point, to explain to those of you who don't know London how bad this division is, if you were to take the Underground from Westminster, which is where Parliament is, in the middle of West London, and you were to take the Jubilee line, which is one of our Underground lines, east towards Stratford, where the Olympics is, I, as a man, would lose 1 year of life expectancy as I go east. Okay? It's that severe. It's the difference between Hong Kong and Ho Chi Minh City, between La Paz and Buenos Aires in terms of life expectancy. We're talking about different worlds. So, you know, the issue of design and planning and trying to do something to rebalance the city, to improve the future lives of people who are going to grow up there, is basically what I'm talking about. And in fact, most of the plans, I worked with Ken Livingstone, the Mayor of London, and the current Mayor, are all about basically improving and emphasizing the investment, as you see here, along these two corridors in pink, which is where new development is to happen, and most of it along the Thames. So let's move to the project itself and try to explain that. The site, we've already seen, is here, in a place called Stratford. Importantly, it's located not just at the heart of this area that I've described to you, but where there is going to be, and there is already, a major international transport route to what we in England still call the continent, in other words, Europe. Right? I see that we're doing a lot of things, even financially, to keep ourselves as separate as possible from the continent, and I think that will continue, unfortunately. But significantly, this site in East London is located along the rail line, the high-speed rail line, which connects to Paris and to Brussels in less than 2 hours. London won the Olympics in July 2005, beating Paris and beating New York and Moscow without expecting it. In fact, I'm told that one of the reasons London won is that the Greek representative pressed the wrong button, so that helped us, and that the French President Chirac so offended the Scandinavian representatives because they said their food was not good, that they voted for London instead of Paris. So that's how we won the Olympics. But behind that, apparently, there is the story that the regeneration argument rather than just making great games with great stadia and great facilities, was the winning ticket as far as the IOC is concerned. It's also an excuse, as you see here, very, very important, linking architecture to planning to money that we received through the tax of the central government, 9.3 billion, so roughly 10 billion euros to invest in one swoop in a very short period of time to change a city for the longer term. Now, the Olympics will happen in different parts of London, but the main facilities that I'm going to be talking about are there in the east. So let me now describe how that structure, how the plan was developed. The first thing you see from this image is that not only is it relatively close to the river, but it's also part of a system of a green corridor which comes from way up north, bringing water and actually a very beautiful landscape right to the heart of London. The project is about what many architects here want to do, which is re-stitch the city together rather than create segregated ghettos. And in this drawing, in fact, by Kees Christianse, when he won the legacy master plan, which I'll sort of describe in a moment, the idea was to recognize, as Jacques knows from the Beijing Olympics, that the event is totally closed. You can't do anything about it for the 2 weeks that happens. But how can you design it in such a way that when the fence comes down, you actually integrate and connect with the surroundings? I've already said that the site has this extraordinary connection internationally, which is very significant, but it already has wonderful connections in terms of tubes and trains and everything else. It's a place that in 10 minutes you can get to from the center of London. I will never forget when the Tate Modern was being conceived and talked about 15 years ago, which then Jacques and Pierre and the team, and Christine is here too, won to convert into what it was. Most people had it out of their mind. They didn't think of it as part of London. It's actually right there in the middle. And I think the same is beginning to happen to this place that no one understands, called Stratford, but actually is only 10 minutes away from most of the central part of the city. So what do you do to actually change that? Well, first of all, the private sector came in and has built one of the largest and ugliest, I have to say, shopping centers, but it's incredibly successful. It opened a few months ago, and it's happening. And the other aspect is to actually work with what is there. I think a theme that will come back in the other presentations. I stress that there's this green corridor. There's nature which relates to these networks of water, these canals which come all the way down from the north to the river, a very important and very beautiful asset. If one had walked through the site a few years ago, this is exactly what it felt like. Just around the site, and this is very important in terms of the social and ethnic relationships which are significant in a project like this, is where London's Indian, Asian, new Eastern European communities live and have lived for absolute centuries. So it's a very diverse area, very poor but very proud communities which have their own way of living, working and integrating. But this is what the site was really like. Most of the site felt like this only 6 years ago. So it was a dump in the middle of London. I mean, that's the sort of thing. What do you do with that? Well, the first thing you need to do is to make it livable. So the first 300 million of the money that came for the Olympic bid, which we wouldn't have had otherwise, was to get rid of electricity pylons and put them underground. So that's a big chunk of money, but the minute you do that, it makes it effectively a place that you can develop. Then investment was put into new facilities for generating energy, very sustainable biofuel systems which are going to support the area, and the project started. It's more or less completed, and these are images from just a few months ago. But let me take you through the actual design and what the aspirations are in making a small piece of city within a much bigger metropolis at this. This is the challenge which you see in the red circle. It was a completely disconnected site. As you see, there are no black lines actually going through it. It was totally cut off from the surroundings. And this, I want your patience to look at these plans just very carefully for a few minutes. That is the entire Olympic site, surrounded by railways and other infrastructure. These are the water systems which are existing. And in the middle, there is a pretty large park designed by the landscape architect George Hargreaves. There are a number of venues that you see here, the main stadium, the aquatic center by Zaha Hadid, velodrome, and then a lot of other ones that you see scattered across the site, and I'll come back to that. This is the major shopping center over here, and around, and this is very, very important, is the grain of the normal city, where normal people live, hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, I worked out that basically the whole of Basel lives around here. 250,000 people live here, so if we take sort of central London. So the project does something in many ways quite radical with respect to many other Olympic approaches. One of the great dangers of Olympics, and Jacques knows this very well, is that you build these extraordinary structures, and I think of Athens in particular, and no one uses them afterwards. There's a Taekwondo stadium, very beautiful, in the middle of Athens, unused. There's a main aquatic center in Athens, unused. So the idea here is to only keep the things we need, right? Now, the Brits, the English, apparently only win Olympics in sports if you're sitting down. So rowing, horseback riding, cycling, and that's it. So we might as well not get involved in keeping facilities for other sports. But the important point is, why keep facilities which are not going to be used by the communities that are going to live there? So what you see here, these red stars, are all the venues which are designed to be temporary and relocatable. So most of the venues, as you see here, are of that sort. Only 4, the velodrome, the aquatic center, the main stadium, and the handball stadium, will actually remain. Now, why do that? You do that because you don't want to keep these white elephants, but much more importantly, you do that because you are creating land, you're creating facility, you're creating resource, which then will become the future housing, the future offices, the future workplaces for East London, in order, remember the point I made right at the beginning, to rebalance the city. So what you see here are the 4 venues that remain. You see here the Olympic Village, which has already been built, which will house something like 6,000–7,000 people, and will be then extended, and 2 places where there are jobs and other activities. So what happens, and perhaps this is the most important diagram, it's a bit boring technically, it's not visually exciting, but when all these temporary venues, the red dots, the red stars, are taken away, you get all these empty sites. You see these sort of colors here. These have been cleaned up, they have electricity, they have sewers, they have good access, so they're fantastic places to basically build new housing and new projects over time. So the master plan, as originally envisaged, and it's very flexible, this is very raw, and I don't think it's necessarily sophisticated, but as an approach, and may be interesting to provoke discussion as a strategy, you begin to see that they get filled in over time to then actually make some sort of piece of city which relates to the surroundings. Now let me just show you in conclusion a few of the images, what it actually feels like, what some of the buildings look like, before concluding this presentation. These are images, for example, of the velodrome, which you see over here by the architects Michael Hopkins and partners, which is permanent and will stay there. This was taken about 6 months ago. And that's an image of actually, I think, a very beautiful building, which I'll show you in a second, by Chris Wilkinson, which is a temporary building for basketball. The Brits don't do basketball, so why keep it? It's enormous. It's 5 times bigger than this space here. Why keep a building which will never be used? So in fact, what's going to happen is that this is now going to Rio. It's been designed, and it costs more to be demounted, put on a ship, and actually sent to the Rio Olympics. This is what the park now begins to look like. I remember that images of what the area was like only 5 years ago. Slightly romantic view of what it feels like. It could be central London. I mean, it already is beginning to have this quality. A competition image of the velodrome structure. Now it's complete, it's already being used, and this is what it looks like inside. Very simple, I think very elegant, and probably one of the best buildings. Here's the basketball stadium, as you see, designed in order to be demounted with a sort of hammer and a few screws, and you sent it off to the States. Other buildings like this, totally temporary, will be taken away. And even the grand building by Zaha Hadid, which I have to say at the moment, and Zaha would, I think, forgive me if I said it looks pretty ugly, is actually designed to do something very clever. Swimming is the most popular sport in the Olympics. It attracts 17,000 visitors who pay tickets, and hundreds of millions of viewers. Now, if you want a swimming pool for community use after that, you don't want to swim on a Saturday morning with your kids with 17,000 empty seats. You really don't want to do that, right? It's not fun. So the building has been designed with these sort of side wings, which are just temporary seating, very cheap, not very elegant, but it will be returned to this as you see it at the end. So this is what we'll all see. In fact, you can see it when you go there today. Not very nice, but when you're inside it, as I was a few weeks ago, you begin to see what this structure is actually like. It will be very simple, very sinuous, and I think a very elegant space, which will not have that sort of seating that you see on the side. The main stadium itself, interestingly, that you can see that all the structure from the ground up is totally demountable. If you want to take it down, this is for 80,000 seats, so it's roughly the same size as the Beijing Stadium, but obviously a smaller footprint. It's been designed for all of that to be taken away and only keep a smaller stadium if that's what its future use will be. So building in resilience, building in flexibility, I think responds to these issues. And here you see what the structures are beginning to look like today with not only the main stadium, but with one of the follies by the artist Anish Kapoor being constructed there. Finally, the Olympic Village is beginning to be under construction, much higher density than things we've normally seen in London, but quite successful, repeating the model of the DNA of many parts of London that we know. Our mayor, Boris Johnson, is a very, very iconographic figure. He has one problem in life, the French. And he says, if they did the Eiffel Tower, what am I going to do? So he commissioned, there are many names for this, and I don't think I can say it in public. But it's interesting. Anish Kapoor won this competition with Cecil Baumann, the engineer. It's there. It's going to be the tallest McDonald's in the world when you go there. But interestingly, a private entrepreneur has now taken it over to sell tickets for the next 30, 40 years. Apparently 1 million people a year will actually go to see this. So let me conclude in the 20 minutes I had available to say that this project is about making a piece of city. And the question I posed at the beginning is, how do you do that? We started with a site, and this is a map of London, very typical for those of us, who use this map called the A to Z. That's what the site was like. Lots of roads, lots of railways, and a big empty part in the middle of it. That's what it will be like this year, during the Olympic Games. And most importantly, in about 10, 20, maybe even 30 years, it might look something like this. And importantly for me, if I half close my eyes or if I were at the back of the room, it would just feel like bits of London. Now, there will be some good buildings, there will be some good spaces, but the main thing, perhaps, is to use design as a way of actually creating a piece of city with a degree of modesty, but understanding the DNA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ricky. I like the idea of these temporary buildings, and since we are on the Rhine here, maybe we can import some great buildings or ship some bad buildings down. And here we come to the next lecturer from the Netherlands, from Rotterdam, so we are really connected, Winnie Maas. Winnie Maas studied landscape architecture first, before he studied at the Technical University of Delft with a Master's of Architecture, Urban Design and Planning. He was a member of the editorial staff of Forum, worked as an architect and town planner in Amsterdam, in Rotterdam, and also for the UNESCO in Nairobi, before he joined Rem Koolhaas's OMA. He is now partner with Jacob van Ries and Nathalie de Vries, and that form the studio MVRDV that was founded in 1991 in Rotterdam. In 2008, and he is still currently the director, he founded the Y Factory, a think tank of future cities at the Delft University of Technology in Delft. In Basel, Zurich, Winnie Maas was involved in a project in Basel of the Kleebeck Insel called Little Manhattan, and also He is the author of a study for Stadtland Schweiz den Zürichsee. Please welcome Winnie Maas from Rotterdam. We are keen to listen what you have to say to us.
Christian, thank you very much. Good to be here in this discussion. From big cities and small buildings, as Ricky has been showing, my response today would be to show actually a series of ways of dealing with this kind of contradiction. Small cities, big buildings. Let me take the attempt of Christian for serious today. And why? Because it's a European paradigm. And I will stay today also in Europe. And I do that because I think at this moment, in this battle between Europe and Asia, and somehow we need to think about that constellation. Europe is this. It has indeed not one small city, it has about 500 small cities of about 100,000 people in its size. So we talk about a serious matter as such. It's bigger in smallness, and we all know what it is. It's cute, we can walk, we take a tram, we are happy, and it has kind of nice monuments over there. But actually, it's not only composed out of kind of cuteness, of smallness. For centuries, we love big buildings in it. We make buildings that are dedicated to bigger sources, we call them gods, and we turn them into our zones of excellence at that moment. Of course, there happened something. We went outside of those domains, and some of our ancestors wanted to be big and made this, or this, or this. And suddenly you see the discussion emerging, how we deal with this kind of contradiction as such. I can understand that, but it doesn't mean that architecture should withdraw itself now in cuteness completely, or in minimalism, or in disappearance. It needs still some kind of guidance in order to survive in this kind of middleness or this mediocrity that could come out of it. So I would plead to make sometimes bigger entities. I would plead to make buildings that step out of that matter or try to comment on it on a very, beautiful way, I hope. I wanted to show that in different ways. It's clear that this small city syndrome is quite celebrated in the Schweiz. The Stadtland Schweiz was partly about that. It's a while ago, and if you look to that constellation, how it was then, 10 years ago or something like that, and you see this, you have some mountains, and the rest is only villages. And you love it. And it grows gradually these days. So this is the Schweiz of our letter, and I think Jacques has shown that also beautifully in some of his studies in Studio Basel, that you hide everything. And in this hidance, there is a moment in that Stadtland Schweiz discourse that I think, should we do that? Or if this is the expected growth, because you don't want to only make houses, you make stadiums, you continue with that, I can understand. How do you do that? Camouflaging or reconcentrating? This is my best kiss that I ever have made to Switzerland, one could say. It wanted to, and it opened up a territory at that moment where I could imagine that, say, Berner Oberland would gradually turn into another kind of landscape, and when Zurich would be Super Zurich at that moment. So I get the impression that showing that at that moment with beautiful thinkers, Thomas Held and others, that in a way it scrutinized my career in Switzerland. I was expelled for a while and not considered in many operations. So what to do afterwards, one could say. Let's go to see what kind of techniques I have, or we have, in order to work with this contradiction, this paradigm. So, one example. I take you to Europe in a very short time to show some of our latent work that in one way can be read in that perspective. So a small city, Oslo, and we are forced to make a national bank there, which is too big. So it will come back later, that's a mistake. Doesn't matter. Because before that, going to that bank, we were asked indeed to go to Berlin, where the mayor was confronting us with this block, empty for a while. a beautiful look on the Kurfürstendamm, and which is a certain decay because of the Friedrichstraße is going on. It's a big monster. It's basically dedicated to the Hitlerjugend in 25 up till. And so what to do with it, with emptiness? Now a new owner wants to turn it into a shopping center to compete with the Friedrichstraße, and I think it's a good way of nuancing that city. So he wanted to have Prada shops, etc., not only in the beginning of the building, but also in the end of the building. How to do that? So we have this monster, and this is then European. How to make it therefore more accessible and even more cute was the literal question that was asked by the developer as well as by the mayor. So we looked to Damien Hirst in a way and imagined that we maybe could cut this building slightly and open up that case and turn the Cumberland Palace into a Cumberlandstraße. And at that moment, that from the Kurfürstendamm, I suddenly can make a section through the Hitlerjugend area and show what the history of Berlin had been and how to celebrate that with all the richness that this new Straße could give towards Berlin. Second technique, that's Oslo. Cutting was the first one that we were first to live with this smaller grain. The second one is indeed with this bigger program of the National Bank that we were forced in Oslo on that spot. They're on the front side of Oslo, where they want to turn it into a kind of eastern island composition, facing the fjord, facing Europe, showing progress and richness in the nearby future. You see it happening. This eastern island composition of elements. And they all are bigger than you think. Why? Because every building is actually half of an enterprise. Every program is cut in pieces. Also in our case, here you see 3 buildings of the same bank and all the connections. This becomes very European. You want to have bigger programs, but you find the technique to splinter it in a way. And we take this piece of it because we were forced to bring it one step further. And it was a kind of compact slab, and everyone wanted to have his own office, so we used to discuss then what a European building can be at that moment. How to fracturize it even more, through sightlines, through passages, through arcades, through more ecological approaches, through making craters for smokers in the building, to add special programs that connect with it, and then you have a rock, a carved out rock, where you can go in, go further, go up, and where every office in a way is connected to this kind of vertical social device as such. Open up our buildings is what it says. It's in that way and fracturize this element so that everyone has a place in this building. Turn this operation into a, say, European context. And here you see images how one gradually can walk now through this building. It questions indeed the techniques, how to deal with big and small. Porosity seems a European aspect, to give light, to give ecology and to give social aspects to it. And I think that the Y Factory recently tried to do that in this project. It's a comment on the American skyscraper, which is corporate. It's a comment on the Asian skyscraper, which is like an extrusion of the similarities as such. And it wants simply to play with Lego, European project, to open up the tower. That's what you can say. So yeah, then we can do it in different ways. We can do it like that, in series kind of sequence. We can do it like this belly that opens itself for social programs. This is the other side of it, turning it into a theater. We can split the towers in different manners, and we can, say, turning it into this kind of splitting act. We can twist the bars and become a vertical village as such, or in blocks, as you can imagine. We can turn it into mini neighborhoods with our own, say, kind of identities as such. Or we turn it into this super cactus that demonstrates that splitting act. There is a series of sequences to be imagined where you can balance between nothing and everything, where you can test it on ecology and economy. And that is kind of shown these days in this kind of, say, sequence, in this Xi'an-like environment that shows all the beauty. Solowit is in that way. And or this kind of stairs. Who is going to copy this tower in this audience soon? Because I love this one. Or this belly, this pregnant towers. Or why can't we build this? I mean, Jacques, you did it here in your city, in a way. I love to show this soon in the MoMA, as you can understand, to discuss on one of the sources of skyscrapers this kind of acts so that we can imagine a future for that. I want to go to also to the opposite. Well, we can miniaturize. Sometimes, on purposely, especially in Europe, we have to think also bigger. Sometimes it's better to make small, bigger buildings a little bit bigger. I'll show an example in Spijkenisse. Where is that? Spike City. It's a part of Rotterdam, at the periphery. It's super cute. It is, this is the center, and it has houses everywhere. One problem, it has the lowest IQ of the Netherlands, and so they want to have a library to save this aspect. And so this is the library, and you know contemporary libraries, because they are on despair, I understand, and they want to have, like, there are many things in it. This is the program. The shops are in it, there are offices, there are rentable spaces, there are auditoria on it, and they never fit. They're like, so, okay, we can just make it for you, and then the rest is the library. And we pushed the library so much that it became very big. And then the urbanist said, it's good that you make Spijkenisse bigger, we want to be on the map of Europe, but this is the maximum you can get. A barn, a super barn in Europe. These are the plans in it. I will not go into that. And say, this is then the mountain of books that we could imagine within that. So you see this barn. Slightly, it's a factor 2.5 of all the houses in Spijkenisse. It is opened up completely as itself, and where you can discover this route from A till Z, where all the books are around this hidden program. So at, say, indeed, at the Beauvoir, I push a book and I can go into the office. And at Sartre, at S section, I will enter the theater in that way. We are proud on knowledge. I'm going to collect all the books of the Netherlands and to put it there to show that we can still have them even in the moments of digitization. And I will turn it into a lantern with this kind of sequence of lamps so that you can see it. I advocate knowledge on that place and test it in that way. So here you see the barn and the construction with the internal, say, steps that bring you up and give you ultimately this perspective of, say, the books versus the village as such. Small buildings can have also a big effect in that way. In Rotterdam, we were asked to make this a kind of extension, and some of you might know that. So I put these houses on top of this, this building. You can go there, and well, it's nice outside. Make a village, paint it a bit blue so that you're halfway heaven in that way. And you become a little bit like, I would like to be there in that way. It becomes soft and anti-Rotterdam, you can imagine over there. But actually, what happens, of course, with that image at that moment, it starts to say, with 40 square meters only, that I want to be big. I want to say with it that Rotterdam can grow, that our cities need investments, that they have to put extra program on it, but you can do it in an individual manner. And I'm happy that this project, in a way, leads now to a new law in the city that you can build on top of your roofs and add stuff so that the middle class stays in this kind of poorer environments as such. Small buildings can also become bigger by gather themselves, and that was, I think, we did in Lyon, where this kind of newness was appearing on the horizon. Cuteness everywhere by architects of the complete French scene that made them even more mignon than ever. So how to react to that? With 5 architects, we started to say, let's make a new passage between this between this new bassin and the station. And let's group them to turn this into a passage in the best, say, French tradition by clustering all the buildings. By 5 architects, force them into one combination and turn that into this kind of space that connects those 2 elements and gives in the same time a view to these areas. And we end, of course, at that moment with a bigger building that wants to demonstrate that action in that larger landscape. And yes, it became even bigger when the mayor said, change your facade from brick into aluminum. And I said, no. At the moment that the French said no to Europe, I made this fenêtre. And where everyone now is a part of a text that shows that we should vote for Europe. This is the 3rd article. And I was so happy that just before Christmas that this mayor, who was against Europe, in the end had to pronounce this text in front of the press. So you can say something bigger. And so I continue with that operation, like here in Rotterdam, with this building that needs an extension, cuteness in the middle of Rotterdam, how to extend that, and we jack the building up now, so that it gets a new stair and a new access, and we turn it into a pedestal, make our history even more important as such. We have to do that also on an urban level. There I'm going to conclude soon in 2 projects with this. in, to position that repertoire that we can build up together to make that dichotomy more clear. This was asked to us, make Greater Paris, also with Ricky in that way, and how to respond to that. And this is our cuteness, you know. We love all this, and we know it very well. We cherish it, and we would embrace it with everything. But this is only like 5% of Grand Paris. This is what Grand Paris is at the moment. And if you travel there and you go around, you don't want to. I mean, it's like moshness is a new word in the Larousse since this discussion. And I'm happy that as a European I can contribute to the innovation of Larousse. And what to do with that? I think what we try to do, I'm not going to show a lot, is to find any place in the existing matter that could do something. I would love to do something in Klein Basel at certain points where you would say, make something extra in it. Any city can do that and can contribute with that program to a further innovation of its center. And if I did that with different projects, then actually I only need a smaller size than Grand Paris. Non, Grand Paris, ce n'est pas Grand Paris, c'est Paris plus petit. And with that you become more dense, and Paris plays a role at that moment because we need cities in order to give more space for the landscapes, in order to give more space for agriculture, and in order to span the gap that is still there and to make that little densities all together. How to end? I'll give you a repertoire of the relationship between small and big, and they are all actually about a bigger picture, I would say. I think that's what our Basel is also about. 250,000 people, some say smaller. And I think you do it good when you make an exemplary city, that you discuss openly what that should be. What can you contribute in that respect to the European landscape as such? And you're halfway. You can enlarge your scope with that. You can enlarge your enterprises. I hope that it becomes more visual in the nearest time. Your shrinked, limited, say, frontiers is also an exemplary on that point. So when we were asked to work on this Rheinufer, on this site, and we discussed not only with your mayor, but also those of Hunange and Weil am Rhein, that it's nice to find out all those plots that are in a way available in time to do something. Funny, what you try to do now, at the moment with the river in the core, can be extended at that moment easily in a kind of international way. Of course, there is a specific, say, Italo-Swiss composition. Of course, there's a very French composition. There's a very German composition. More addresses, more fiscalities on the same operation. I think that would help on that. I end with this, of course. What can the Swiss contribute in that landscape? This is your site. This is Lübeck, and for some of you it's far out. What can you do far out, which is possibly in the future quite central in that direction. It has a Rheinufer, and it has a kind of arm which smells like hell and is like, because of a lot of shit is in it. And yeah, of course, it's a dead end. It doesn't get enough water, etc. So you have a very Dutch problem in a way, hydraulic problem to do that. So what can we do about that? If this is the island and are we going to extend the existing neighborhood to that end, or can we maybe cut this area so that we can make the Rhine bigger in that way, make two Rhines? And in that way, every building is next to the Rhine. Even the existing neighborhood can do that and can turn that into this operation. So that's how it can look from the city in a way, with cute bridges, cute buildings, with new kind of edges, both on the Rhine side as in the inner Rhine side, as you can see in this place. It will be done in phases, of course. So in time, we can find, like, say, a method for all those things that you cannot do yet in the current city, yet in the current laws that you have. Do it there. Make an Alter Basel in that way. That is Neu Basel in that moment that you can do in time, and leads to these three ufers at that moment, so that everyone can benefit at that moment. And they have different relationships, different connections to France, to the existing Viertel, to the existing campuses that are over there. It leads to this octopus that we could imagine on that side. And then, indeed, you can think, and some say in the press, this is Manhattan. No, it's not. These buildings are between 3 stories high, just townhouses, and maybe some of them 60 meters high. But because of its smallness, its cuteness, its narrowness, the 15-meter laws that we have in our cities, they look like a scale mistake. And I like that. Because suddenly, yes, you can imagine it without windows. This could be Manhattan, but you built an answer towards our American friends in the heart of Europe in a European way. That's what to be. With smallness, you can be big. And with that, I hope to end this presentation and give the floor to Jacques, who will probably give a third interpretation on this subject. Thank you very much for your attention.
Jacques keeps it for his presentation. Is it okay? Thank you very much. And I heard you may be expelled in Switzerland, but certainly not in Basel. Always welcome. Jetzt kommen wir zum letzten Keypoint-Präsentation hier von Jacques Herzog. Er gehört mit Pierre Demeron und seinen Senior-Partners Christine Binswanger, Askan Mergenthaler, Stefan Marbach mit dem Büro Herzog und Demeron sicher zu den weltweit renommiertesten Büros. Dabei schufen sie Bauten in verschiedenen Maßstäben. In kleinen Städten an großen Gebäuden, wie zum Beispiel gerade hier in der neuen Messe Basel. In großen Städten mit kleinen Gebäuden, wie das Kaixa-Forum neben dem großen Kunstmuseum. Oder in großen Städten an sehr großen Gebäuden, wie das Birds Nest. Aber auch ganz aktuell in kleinen Städten an kleinen Bauten, wie das Unterlinde Museum in Colmar. Jacques Herzog unterrichtet, wie gesagt, am ETH-Studio Basel, im Institut Stadt der Gegenwart, wo Städte, Landschaften, aber auch Fragen wie Energie, Wasser, neuestens Food und Abfall nachgegangen wird. Jacques gilt als pointierter Vertreter der Veränderung in der Schweiz, aber auch in unserer Stadt. Und wir freuen uns auf deine Ausführungen. Bitte. Kannst du einfach... Ja, du kannst Deutsch reden, oder? Finde ich okay.
I'm supposed to speak German or English? English? Okay, I do it in English so Ricky can understand. But I think I'm going to speak about Basel. But strangely, I start with London. I think it is about, we talk about being careful, looking carefully into, how does this work here? Since our early days, we have been using Basel, because we've been forced to, as a kind of a playground for different exercises, to understand what actually a city is, whether it's small or big or large or medium or whatever, was not so much a topic. It was just about learning what is a building, what is a street, what is a square, what is a tree, how do people like to live, regardless about taste or whether it's cute or not cute or ugly or whatever. It was about learning how to do things. When we were much later invited to participate in the Tate competition and we won that competition, we had to make a big jump. Of course, we've been working outside Switzerland before, and being located in Basel was teaching us to work also in other countries, because for obvious reasons, Basel may be a small city, as a Swiss city, but it's on the way of becoming a metropolitan city in 3 countries. And from our early days, we've understood this is a very interesting potential, even if it's never going to reach a size like London or even Shanghai. Through this process of metropolization, of reaching out of your narrow narrow frontiers, you can make a more interesting place, a more wide place, a place which attracts more people and more interesting people and gives the people who are living in a city more interesting platform. London was such an opportunity where we could learn that and where we could make a contribution. As Ricky said in his presentation, the Tate was 15 years ago looking like this, and even if it was really absolutely in the heart of London, nobody knew the place. It was a castle that wanted to be centrally focused. This tower is centrally focused to be in line with St. Paul's Cathedral, which is still today the most important building in London. It was unknown. And so we had to reverse it, paradoxically, to make it the most, or one of the most public and open buildings. London did not have a contemporary or modern art museum. London was still then very conservative in terms of art. And the Tate has made a big contribution changing that. And I think the most interesting contribution we could make was to leave the building as it was in many ways, on the contrast, and this is a technique we use very often, to enhance the potential that was there. So to do it more like the Tate, to do it more like what was given at this cathedral kind of a space. We were digging it out to the ground and transformed it into perhaps the most successful public space in London, or one of the most successful public spaces in London, which attracts 5 million people every year. So this is a huge space. This is a huge building, and clearly this kind of a space could not be in any other city, not even in Paris, because no other city would attract so many people, no other city would use such a space, for instance in Basel, but even in Berlin, which is not so much bigger than Basel, this space would be monumental, would not only be a challenge too high or too big, it would be wrong. It would simply be wrong, and it would be a failure. You can very easily test whether buildings are successful. Not that architecture critics say this is great architecture, but whether people love it, whether people go to see it, use it, whether it works. Cities have to work. Cities have to be loved, have to be cared about. This is a space that has been also adopted by the artists. Many artists have done a piece there. There's one major piece every year, which is almost like, I would say, an addition to the architecture. They like reinstall that space that gives then for 1 year in the city, in the heart of London, a different kind of feeling, a different kind of home to visitors. So that's an example of a scale and also a kind of space that is made for a very large city that attracts the kind of people every year that was very impressively described by Ricky before. That's also why this edition that we are currently working on makes sense and would not make sense in any other place, because besides London, the Tate, maybe besides the Louvre, museums are mostly empty. MoMA in New York attracts not even half the people that the Tate attracts. So it doesn't make sense to always make museums bigger, bigger, bigger. Yes, in Basel it makes sense because it makes it bigger, but not so much. Basel has one of the greatest museums in the world, so it's good to make that addition. But it would be wrong to do it in a way that I just tried to describe. Since the early days, we've been working on how could Basel grow without making it stupid, without making it in a pretentious way a different place. We've been working with Remy Zaug and have written this manifesto that was based on a question rather than a title. Could it become a city? And when I say could it become a city, this is of course provocative, but Basel is not yet the city that it could grow into, which is this international metropolitan area with roughly 1.5 million people. But it's on the way to it, and I think right now we witness a very interesting moment. Winnie was very impressively showing one of the most interesting areas of growth and expansion, and I will show you a few others. We've written this text that was at the beginning of all our thinking about cities. Interestingly and very clearly for our biography, we've done it with Remy Zauk, who is a visual artist, and we've looked at the city in a, I would say, unorthodox way, into looking what is there, how is the city really to the smallest grain. We've looked in all these different typologies of neighborhoods and tried to learn from them so that the interventions we were proposing were always very precisely, almost like in a medical way, precisely based on the existing world. We've then made a proposal which was namely based on the green plan, on the emptiness of the existing between the existing built city. We also have to say that the cities that have been presented before, namely London, are based on a scale and a size and also an idea which is non-democratic. Of course, now London is a democratic city, but what we admire and what is great in Paris, in London, in Berlin, even in Amsterdam, has not been realized within a democratic regime. The scale that we don't have in Switzerland, the great scale we have in Switzerland is nature. In Basel, this is the Rhine River and the three landscapes, the Jura, Black Forest and the Vosges, which are coming together at this bend of the river. That's our potential. We don't have big avenues, we don't have boulevards, we don't have kings who have leftover hunting grounds that were turned into parks, etc., etc. So we have to deal with this kind of bottom-up idea, with this kind of bottom-up mentality, and we have to try to convince the people to understand where the potential is, to make green spaces even more green, more interesting, more coming together, and do the same thing with the possibly built areas. And we've proposed, namely, 3 areas to expand, which is along the Rhine. This is almost 30 years ago. When you see that this area that was potentially already there in the north, where it's very red, this is where the city not only can expand, but this is where the city becomes French and German. And in the east, it becomes Swiss. And it expands it along where the city on the river is really specific. Basel, to every foreigner, and also to us, is still the city along the bent river, where the city, the buildings touch the river and define the river, and where retrospectively it's been defined by the river, like the Münster, etc. But yes, we have to find other centers and other places, and those 2 are potentially interesting areas. Then we have other areas which, in the bottom-up democracy, are free or have a potential, which is the track fields. And then, that is much more difficult, is to find a circular connection in all, as I call them, non-democratic cities, also Vienna, for instance, or Paris. This could be easily done to do a circle. But in other cities, the more linear expansion is the more obvious and the more easy way, because there's no obstruction. Like in a Western village, everything is just linear. We've then proposed possible ways to densify, to add green and red. You can see it's really hardcore, archaic. And again, the area that, in fact, I'm very happy that this is happening, this kind of Rheininsel, Kliebeck-Insel, towards a really new center. But there are others. There are other places that I will briefly sketch to you. This map of Basel is showing all the areas that we with Herzog & de Meuron are working on and have been working on in the past. So you can see that also in the daily practice with very concrete projects. There's quite a few buildings and projects that have been realized or not been realized, but they were giving us the opportunity to further understand why we do what we do, and hopefully do it in the right way and do it in a successful way, especially when the scale is going up. We've then, much later, together with Manuel Herz and other people of the ETH studio in Basel, been working on a comic book that in a different language tries to enhance what we've been learning 20 years before and taking it a step further. It explains how we could live in that future city that exists already now, but it's in a way of transforming and morphing into another city, using all the activities anywhere in the world you expect from a city to deliver, at housing, working, trafficking, leisure, etc., etc. And of course, we've also made perhaps the most interesting proposal is to expand and create new landscapes in the French side. Namely, there's a huge potential to dig out lakes that would be great for leisure, but also for new housing areas. When the dig out of gravel can be combined, this kind of industrial process can be combined with consciousness of landscape, this could produce amazing new areas for future generations. Now, more concretely, because as a commission, we've been working on very specific areas of transformation. One is the Dreispitz-Areal, which is here in, is there a laser pointer? Oh, yeah. For those who are not from Basel, there are several areas, the Dreispitz, and they are all, this is mostly in one hand. That's why there is a potential to transform it. We have Roche, we have Novartis, which are large industrial areas that have been stayed in the same company hand and have gone through a dramatic and very interesting process of transformation that is now going on and takes companies which have a very industrial or even pre-industrial or early industrial origin into an almost post-industrial or contemporary way of becoming life sciences instead of just tinting or inventing colors, etc., etc. Then we have these new areas in the north that have been briefly described by Winnie. We have the track fields on the Swiss side and on the German side. And we have, of course, the Dreispitz that I will briefly sketch, which is also in a process of transformation. We've been commissioned to do an urban study, which was very in-depthly describing the possible way to transform this. This is an existing neighborhood, which is a very interesting mixture of industrial buildings, small commercial buildings, larger commercial buildings, warehouses, a lot of warehouses, and track fields. That's more or less how it looks like. And we've defined three typologies: Manhattan, Soho, Queens, as a kind of an abstraction, or a figuration rather than an abstraction of possible interventions. And the Broadway, which would turn a track field into a very concrete boulevard that opens up this world to the outside. We've been developing this master plan in that we want to use existing buildings, and we want to also give the opportunity to existing companies and commerce to stay in place and to mix it with housing. And I think it's a great decision of the government to bring the art school in the heart of this new area. That's the kind of boulevard, the Broadway that we described, and that's at the point, the peak of the Dreispitz, facing the track field. That also, in line with this early study we did with Remy Zaug, has a more vertical, a possibility to do vertical buildings. Novartis has also been mentioned based on the master plan of Lampugnani. Here is like a world in itself. I must say I'm very impressed by the quality of what has been delivered on what is happening here. And the interesting thing is that, of course, the quality, architectural quality, but also the kind of people that live there, the kind of spirit, even if it's an enclosed or a gated area, that I'm sure will spill out into the city as a quality, and especially also once it touches this riverside that is concretely happening now. So the opening of the riverfront to the north on both sides is a concrete project which is now happening. And we are working currently on that building, which allows to touch the campus, to touch the public realm on behalf of restaurants and bars on the river side. Furthermore, we are working on Roche Areal, and as I said, we have to be careful. We introduce a scale which has not been seen and used in Switzerland before. And we have been working on this area for many, many years and have done buildings on that place before. And the building and every building is based on a very clear thinking of how to transform the whole of this area. Since the early days, what Roche has done was very clearly mastered by a vision, by an idea of first the kind of villa of the boss, and then the workers' houses and industrial buildings. Into another scale in modernity, based on the master plan of Salvisberg and Rhône, exactly, who has done very interesting buildings, very nice, straightforwardly modernistic language. That is now being reworked and again scaled up and densified based on a game plan that we have been working with together with Roche, that basically defines the south and the north area, the south area facing the Rhine, which is about densification and opening, and this area here, which is about becoming denser, and the in-between that is not mentioned, the Grenzacher Straße, to become a kind of a boulevard of life sciences. So the green area, so the whole site from a purely industrial site becomes an urban area. The existing thing then as first series of volumes to scale up and to transform repetitive linear buildings into something else, where not only production but also research, administration, headquarter functions are being accommodated. That the first one of that series has been delivered last year, as you can see here, always in line with the neighborhood which is adjacent to the Roche area. Then this series of buildings along the Grenzacher Straße, the previous one was here, then this whole row here, which are buildings that are again very different, all these kind of glass buildings which are, as you can see here, having a different neighborhood, a different function, more public functions, more opening up to the street and the street life. Finally, the building one, as Roche calls it, which will be by far the largest building in Switzerland, which is going to be accompanied, perhaps in the future, with other taller buildings facing the riverside. So the whole relationship to the river and to the rest of Basel will be changing through this building. And not only the building, but also the street, the quality of the street has to be transformed into a more park-like area, which is giving the whole area also a different flavor. So within Basel, this area Dreispitz become in some way very specific, distinct areas, like clusters within a city, that when you go through have a different feel. And it's not a kind of everything can go everywhere. That's the kind of plan. Finally, the Messe, where we are, and as it has been said before, this also is going to have an incredibly large-scale building, some fragment of which you can already see when you go out of this space. This is in the heart of Basel, really, and this area has been incredibly much changing over the last 50 years, and I will briefly show this evolution. That's the first Messe Schweiz, the Messe Basel, which became Messe Schweiz, building which was where Messe and the idea of a fair was totally different. So also the functions and the importance of those areas, all those areas are interesting historically, and this kind of process of transformation, we have to understand that before we can propose new buildings. That's briefly how it has changed. Buildings that have been added, that have been taken away. Pierre and I went to school here in this building. So it's really Sandkasten kind of experience. Then the 50s building that we all admire very much. Everybody who's not from here should go inside this space, which is really a very interesting architecture, piece of architecture, because perhaps the most interesting one on the square. Then in the 60s, this has been added. Then this has been added. Then the park garage has been added, which is still in place. Then this Congress Center has been added. Then the tower has been added. This has been done by Hotz. The tower by Morger. That's how it looks now. And that's the evolution of this connection through the city, through the German station, that we consider as a kind of an axe, but in fact it is a sequence of independent streets and independent spatial ideas. That's why we also believe, and that's why we explained that cutting this street and making this a distinct area again makes perfect sense. That all this kind of way has totally different character. It's a very European experience, as Winnie pointed it out rightly. We are in Europe, and we have to accept that, and we have to deal with these issues. And more we do this, more we accept this, more we can deliver also quality. This is how this is being transformed with this kind of huge building. This is going to be an amazing transformation of scale, and it's also, I must say, a big challenge for us as architects to introduce a scale and to make it a quality, like I said about the Tate, to make that space here under this opening become really something that people will love and will accept. This sketch shows how we imagine this kind of sequence of spaces to work together. Now we are in here. Oh, this will go here. This building will be taken down here in, I think, 2-3 months from now. So it's the last big event probably in here. Also, I mean, that's more on an architectural term, because this is going to be a huge fair. We don't want to make it a kind of a monster in a way that it's just a box, but it's a stack of different buildings, one on top of each other, with this kind of central opening in the middle. That would be just a volume, a straight volume, and we decided to subdivide it or to fragment it into 2 or 3 different halls that would also be readable as distinct entities, distinct halls. And that's how I imagine not just making a new fair, a new hall, but that the whole place, this whole area, has to change again. It has to become something totally different. It has to become a real center, a fair center that has its own urban scale and its own urban specific quality. That's the building we are currently, which is now being built. That's a project of Mork Architect to do another tower, who has already done this one here. And eventually there is a potential to do another one here, which would make it then into a very, very urban, very large-scale project within a small city. That's my last slide. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Jacques, and also Herzog and Demeron, to constantly keep on thinking and expanding the scale of my city. Thank you very much. Now we start the panel. I want to introduce Judith Scholz. She received her bachelor degree in mathematics first, and then she studied architecture at the ETH in Zurich. She was working as an architect, was chief editor of the Trans Archithese, and now of the weekly periodical Tech 21. Judith Scholz will lead the panel, and I ask all of you to come here. Thanks.
Well, I think it will be difficult to make a short discussion because we have heard so many interesting topics. So I try to focus on one thing that I think is very interesting, and that was a common subject also in all three speeches we've heard. And that's, Winnie, you talked about the small city syndrome, which is very, very common in Switzerland. And also Jacques mentioned that Swiss cities are based on a democratic idea, whereas a lot of other comparable big cities in Europe are based on a non-democratic idea, even though now they are working in democratic systems. And this is especially true for London. Now, when you build in such a city now, you have to convince the people. You talked about make the people love the new place. And I would like to know, how do you manage to do that? How do you convince people, especially in Switzerland, to accept a larger scale, to accept a big gesture? We don't have the tradition of the big gesture. In Switzerland, everyone thinks they are farmers. Somehow even though we are an urban civilization, and an urban country now. We are based on urban economics. We are not an agrarian country. But the mentality is still anti-urban. And the large scale is super urban. So how do you make people accept them? Do you have a strategy? Maybe you can talk about the experience you made here in Basel.
First of all, I must say that it's true. It's absolutely true what you say, that it's difficult to convince people, and here we have to do this. We have experience also in Hong Kong, which is really not very much based on democracy in its past, and where big scale is really hardcore big scale. And you can't believe how fundamentally people were against us doing a very large project in a Hong Kong police station, which is really central Hong Kong. And we had to scale it down and down and down. And for strange reasons, in this place, people were let them express their opinion. So I think if whether it's big or whatever, transformation as such is difficult in everybody's life. Architecture is just one particular field, and of course we have to be very careful, as I said, because this is going to stay up for quite a while. And there is no recipe. I think some projects work, some good projects fail, but also some bad projects fail because of opposition. And we take the message. This was a a long process. We had to convince the people, even if sometimes we have to convince ourselves, is this really the right thing to do? Is this not just because this is our job to do this kind of Überdeckung here, this big lounge? Now that I see it, I haven't, you know, we cannot vote here, but I think it's going to be very interesting. And we were very released when we see that. So, you know, when you ask me, how do you do this? More, we have an experience. I don't want to play the old guy's game here, but more you are experienced, you become more credible, and you know yourself what can work and what can't work. When we did the Tate, we were not so experienced, we were lucky, but we were always, always very intense, very serious on the job. I can't say more because there is no rule for this, you know. It's like cooking. You know, there is, of course, you can have a recipe, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. We have to be so honest also.
I mean, that point does raise an issue. It's not just a question of experience. I think there's been a shift, probably in the last 20 years, in the way that architecture is explained, and therefore also received. I mean, it's not, you know, we have two rather eminent architects. The way you talked about your buildings was totally understandable. I mean, and I don't think you put it on because of it's a wide cross-section. And I think that, you know, there's an explanation, there's a narrative, there's a desire to understand the bigger picture, the social picture, the ethnographic, the natural, which then brings people in much more easily. In other words, you don't have this, you know, rough confrontation, let's say, with a piece of abstract design, which can be intellectually challenging or not. And I think that is a significant shift, regardless of where you operate, you know, whether it's in Asia or in the comfortable, more, let's call it democratically mature environment. So I think in that sense, but I don't know whether you agree with that. There's been a shift in the process, you know, which is why I explained the Olympic process, but also a shift in difference in product. Just one thing, just to completely argue against myself, yeah? The whole Olympic project, which feels all democratic and nice and fits in, could only have happened if you took the planning powers away from the democratic process. It's the only way it happened. So if you imagine a red line around the site, which fits into 4 different boroughs, different like mini cantons of the city, 4 different ones, who don't like each other because they're different politics and everything else. You take that red line, it was turned into, by the mayor and by the government, a special development zone just for this event. And people like it so much that we got planning permission in and did all the things that have been done, that it's going to remain like that for another 20 years. But so there sometimes you have to actually intervene in a slightly different way, which doesn't mean you don't connect and engage with the people and use a narrative, but the political process needs to sometimes be adapted to do the sorts of things you're doing. I'm curious how it's happening here in Basel.
I would like to add something to your question, because your question is put also in a certain kind of perspective, a slightly negative perspective also. There is more enthusiasm, maybe due to good work that has been created over time, to do something new, or to add something, or to innovate. Or, I mean, I think the belief that that we have to do something in order to innovate has grown. And the fact that there is a battle between 2 continents going on also encourage in a certain way to invest. And generally people have, I mean, the curiosity has also therefore grown. And we should celebrate that and use that in a way, I mean, in a very careful way, and turn all these elements into kind of direction. So it's not that negative as you paint.
Well, you have to be careful, that's true, and I mean, it's not always possible to have this intervention like in London, so we have to cope with democratic structures, and as Jacques Hertog pointed out, change is always painful. So when we are talking about Messe Basel, there are no inhabitants who have to move out, but in London, that was the beginning of all. So for the first inhabitants, they just had to leave partly, to make,
in the case of the Olympics?
yes, to make place for new structures. So it may be for the good of the city in the long term, but in the short term, it's very painful for the people involved. And how could you make it easier?
Well,
Did you have a strategy for this?
Yeah, well, if you notice, nearly all the projects that we've been talking about, the aerial photographs, so very large, ex-industrial, empty sites. Right? On the whole, given that we're operating in these delicate, democratic environments, on the whole, these interventions do not require the mega displacement of residents as you might have in China, for example, where someone decides, the leader of the Communist Party, and you move out. In the case of London, actually very similar, I think, to the cases you're talking about. In that whole area, there were very, very few residents. Some of those early images, particularly from the air, would show that it would be very like the sort of railway areas, disused railway areas. In fact, there was one small housing, 60s housing, which was falling apart because of bad concrete, and it had become a sink estate, we call it, where problematic people were sort of concentrated. And I think three families were moved as residents. Quite a lot of businesses were moved, but they were the sorts of businesses that require, they were sort of storage for McDonald's foods or things like that. So it was quite easy to actually relocate them elsewhere with substantive amount of relocation costs. So the politicians, as ever, were very shrewd. This was an area of London which had space, had good connections, and made sense in terms of a future piece of city, and you didn't have a massive political headache to remove people. That's where the Olympic Games was located. So it happens to not, well, I guess it reflects, it's the other side of the coin. You only intervene in areas where you don't have to cause profound social disruption, or if you do, you have to do it very delicately and understand that process.
I would like to open the directions a little bit beyond London, because what I like in the European landscape is due to the history of all these different towns, there's an other way of possible reactions, and that when there is Rotterdam wants to be bigger in a way because it has destroyed so much, it wants to come out of that Calimero feeling, and where others are completely protective and subtle as such. In a way I like that. I think it would be much more attractive to acknowledge that stronger and to find techniques in this, to compare that and to show what you can do with that given cultures and given, say, context as such. And that would maybe also change the pieces of architecture, the interpretations that we could deliver and enlarge our catalog of reinterpretive beauties. And that, so I see different techniques and different constellations. We share maybe indeed all this kind of mini spots, as you indicate also for Basel, but then the architecture could appear completely different if we can imagine, say, the rhetorics of that town. Paris is, when you accept their enveloping, which is different than Basel, you have a complete other kind of interpretation than here. So, okay, let's do it and let's use that.
But your interpretation for Switzerland, I mean, you've shown it, this dense city around the Lake of Zurich and the rest of it nature. I mean, everyone was laughing. No one takes it seriously, although, in my opinion, it is a very, very serious idea, because as Jacques Herzog pointed out, our big scale is nature. So we have the Alps, we have the nature.
No, but I think this is an unserious proposal. I think that's his most stupid project.
Well, why do you think it's a stupid project?
No, because it destroys everything that makes Switzerland great, which is the absence of big scale. Especially such a small city as Zurich, such a small lake. It would destroy exactly what makes the city nice. So why should you do it?
But sometimes suggestions are meant to find out clarity and to create in that for more like a collective answer. So maybe, yeah, okay, you have used me in that way to celebrate that opinion, which is in a very beautiful, to not do it. So that's.
No, I think Switzerland has to accept what you said before to become urban. Whether they can do this or not is another question. We have the SVP in Switzerland, which is not only politically difficult, but also the most anti-urban energy we have in this country. And this exists in every country, but not all conservative parties are anti-urban. But in Switzerland, the most conservative party is anti-urban, just as the Green Party, and they touch themselves like behind somehow in a very awkward way. So there are very strong anti-urban forces. That's why we have to find strategies, like I try to show with Basel, where some sites can be densified with nobody objecting. But to go on holy sites, like a lake or a mountain or a valley, I also think it's perhaps not the right way, because I believe, and that might be different, I believe in specificity. Places are different, and I like that difference. I like them to be like this and like that. I like to enhance the specific difference, and the specific quality in Switzerland is that particular landscape. Even cuteness is an ugly word, but let's say the specific beauty, even if it's maybe a little folkloristic, can have a nice quality, and I'm sure you would also love it. You just don't admit it, Winnie.
For me, cuteness is there's an ironic layer in it. That's clear in it. Though what you just mentioned, that is interesting. That two parties in Switzerland, I don't know the constellation too much, honestly, so I'm an outsider. But that pleading for a certain kind of rurality or greenness, and actually the Super Zurich plan would enlarge that perspective, no? Because then you have more green areas and better national forests. And a more lighter substance. That so a choice to have somewhere that.
But it's not. I think we shouldn't look at urbanism in such a morphological, or it's built or unbuilt. But the quality of Switzerland is that you have good things in many places, not in one place. Zurich is not such an important city that it could cover all of Switzerland, because the quality is that Basel is different from Zurich, and still is. Geneva is different, even Bern is different, and that makes it really also nice, you know. And that's what I think we should accept and maintain. Our proposal about Switzerland in the future that we've developed in the Swiss book that came out in the ETH studio is totally different. It defines metropolitan areas, it defines city networks, and it defines touristic resorts, and it even defines what we call Brachen, the absence, the kind of areas of decay, and willingly letting it decay. So sorry, I don't want to say that this is more subtle, but yes, it is more in-depth studied, and I think it's more real, and it can take densification and growth in a more natural and nice way.
That's
as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bigger issue here. I mean, I realize now why you've been exiled.
No, he's very much
I now
here
realize,
in Basel,
but of course,
the
issues in Switzerland are not just Swiss issues, and I think it's very important to remind ourselves. The debate about densification is about using our resources better. Right? It's that massive issue, and it's as relevant here as it is in London or elsewhere. Therefore, it puts pressure in a very interesting way and gives opportunity to those of you who are making buildings to make bigger buildings. I mean, that's the challenge. That's why you thought of this theme. But at the same time,
connect places better, because Switzerland is a country where public traffic is very, very interesting. And I think to connect those different spaces in different locations, otherwise you destroy areas. And I think we have gone past the period where you have central cities which dominate everything and made everything, all the rest dull, and itself dull. Already now Switzerland is too much Zurich. Switzerland has too much Zurich because it makes itself stupid. Swiss TV is stupid because it's only centralized in Zurich. You know, all that kind of things. And that's, I'm not speaking out of fear because I want everything here, but I want a big portion here. I want a big portion in Zurich and in other places, and that debate makes Switzerland different. And I think talking about difference is talking about the future.
No, that's true. But I think, you know, as the Queen would say, I couldn't possibly comment. I mean, on Basel. I think the issue is in terms of the role of the architect and the role of design and making difference, is that all this is happening in a political context of deregulation. Shift to the right, not having the money to spend anymore on big planning. Therefore, actually, your roles, well, the roles of many people in this room, in actually making place, making difference, making quality, become much more important than they were before. So whether it's here, and how you calibrate that difference through design becomes very, very important. And I think the one thing that perhaps hasn't been said in this discussion is the role of public space. I mean, it's not just the building, and both of you described that, I think, in an important way. But I think that's where more thinking has to happen, how you also can maintain those different ethnicities, those different ethnographies of what makes city.
And it's difficult because, I mean, when you talk about specific qualities of cities, then you always refer to the center, to the old town, because the rest of it, I mean, the agglomeration, it's always the same. So if you don't want it to grow more and to lose even more worthy land, then you have to densify the center. That means you have to change the center. Yes. And as we all know, everyone is for density, but please, not at my place. And so you have to give a better conscience for the inhabitants of the center and of the city that density can be made in a good way. So I think that's why projects like you've described can be very important, because they set a good example. Yeah. With, as you told us, small buildings. I mean, of course, compared to the rest of the buildings in Basel, it's big, but compared to other cities, it's small but dense and very urban.
I think that Winnie's project that we also work on in the north of Basel, in the island, is a very interesting opportunity, because this should be dense, should be tall, should be mixing, very tall, very small. I think Toronto has that kind of mixture in a very interesting way. So that can be very different from other areas in the city. You know, maybe it takes over some ingredients of public space, like the Rhine edges and all these things, but it is a different thing. What I think has been wrongly made in the years after the war in Switzerland is that it tried to densify everywhere, in that it made the existing streets, a little wider, in doing so destroying existing streets, making the buildings a little taller, but they had to move back 3 meters. That was an uninspired, stupid way to do it. So to create density, to create new areas, is really a challenge, and we have to be honest that a lot is just crap. There is so few successful city expansions, densifications, so few. That's why I say we have to be so careful and also modest. I don't know, I'm not by nature a modest person, really? but I try to be in this respect, Ricky, in that it's really tough challenge to do great projects when it comes to scale it up, to make it denser. Otherwise, we ruin everything. You know?
Yeah, but it's a step-by-step method. Huh? You can do so now, I think for 20 years, there's a kind of conviction in Europe to, but with all kind of rhetorics to think about density, think about concentration, and think about mixage in order to establish a kind of continuity in our social and economical performances. And you can see that at the same moment, mini projects and bigger projects appear, and that sets a ground. So again, I would like to be a little bit also positive in that respect, and that that's the issue is that continuing now? Does this audience also say vote for the city, or is this audience now here in order to kill the city? Or let's give it as an example. This today, because I'm a bit like confused looking to the media how discussion on cities in Europe is conceived. So there's seemingly almost a 50-50% division of those that love it and those that hate it. So let's open that box a little bit. To say.
Maybe most of the people would accept urbanity as the only opportunity we have here. This is a messe which is, you know, attracting that kind of people. But I think we are witnessing a shift in how we architects have to tackle these subjects. And this would open a whole new chapter in our debate, which is very architectural. To come back to your questions, how do you do this? I think one is politically, strategically, and Ricky was responding to that in that he said that architects are more fit now to communicate their ideas. I totally agree. That's also how architecture has shifted in urbanism, in the public visibility. I would say, on our side, we have been involved in doing master plans in Lyon. We are now involved in Basel, in different places. We're involved in Burgos. So more and more, I come to the conclusion that we have to be more rigorous. Not maybe like Vittorio Lampugnani in a kind of a stylistic way, but I think we have to give more, see urbanism not as a kind of a battlefield of total freedom where everybody can do his freaky things. But I think that those areas that we admire have been much more controlled. If I was in London 2 days ago, it's incredible how many buildings are just based on exactly the same facade. But they all look very rich. Paris is the most extreme. It's perhaps the most beautiful city in the world. Paris is the absolute beauty. And almost all the buildings are the same. They're very good, though. Why should all the buildings be different if they are not extraordinary buildings? We witness a time where everybody can do whatever he or she wants and likes. But we open it up more and more. I think that Islam comes in with these, for us, stupid rules of whatever, this kind of rigor, which is insane, is like a corrective, as we say in German, for what we've done in the West. So I think the crisis of the city and the acceptance of the city is to do with a lack of inspiration or a wrong way of inspiration from the architect side. I'm not speaking the word of new conservatism, but I'm speaking the word of more control and more maybe architectural sense that should be infused in master planning. And that's somehow also what you were talking about.
I notice here maybe a possible confusion. On one hand, because I agree with you that rigorousness is needed, in that that every urban plan needs an author, needs a kind of direction, and needs therefore visibility and a certain kind of way of dealing with it. Then we can encourage, say, different quarters over the planet, if not Europe, and encourage that difference, this sparkling galaxy that Europe can offer. That I certainly agree with that. That does not mean that all these quarters will go to a kind of new London or like a new Parisian monotony as such. That I disagree with you, because if it depends on the experiment and it depends on the issue that one can raise. If we dedicate one, what we try to do in Almere now in the moment, to make one quarter, 2,000 houses, which is completely dictated by the internet. You go to the internet, you design your plot, you have to make your own road, and you make your own infrastructure and sewage systems, etc. That's all in the ground price, in a low ground price, it's in it. Then I'm curious what kind of urbanism come out of it. The rigor in that aspect is that I don't know what the streets will look like, and that they are. I drive there because another one wants to have a kind of Barba Papa zone, so I have to do like this, and then I come to a cross house and I have to do like this around it. I think that is all. That deserves also rigorness. So I would like to plead to defend the issue that I'm a bit worried that when we define rigorness in this kind of Berlage-like way, or in a kind of Haussmann-like way only, then we miss a point and we miss a certain kind of potential innovation in the European landscape.
I think we have to test it. I think that there are areas in the city where you can do this and where you can do that. We should test it, but we should not exclude anything. We should not exclude anything.
But I think going back to your very important point, I think the issue of confidence and who's in control comes into it. And I thought Vinny's point, right, when you showed the Oslo project, it's fascinating. Some corporations, some companies, therefore clients, are seeking a way of fragmenting their own image. I mean, the fact that, you actually have 3 buildings which are smaller than the whole, that was an interesting point. And I think it is a very subtle sort of European condition, you might say. And, but of course, we are talking at the moment, if we look globally where things are being built, If we look globally where people are living, 80% of the next 20, 30 years of new building will happen in Africa, will happen in India, will happen in Asia, where the game is very different. I mean, in terms of, it's exactly the opposite. We think of Raymond Koolhaas's CCTV building. You know, it's exactly, you want to make that sort of statement. I mean, you're working, you've had a bit of trouble recently, my friend, no? By designing a building in Seoul, which is so iconic that a few people in America have noticed, right? Mm. Well, you know what I'm talking about? Right, okay, right. No, but I mean, that, I'm always curious, how do you operate in these sort of in this binary world with the same form?
I'm very, very, very sorry to interrupt, but I'm sure, I mean, we have to go on with this discussion in another place because I get signs that we have to just leave this podium, and I'm very sorry about it, but I think a lot of questions have been raised. We have got some answers, but not all answers, and it's clear that the discussion has to go on, especially also about the question of the role of the architect in the future, and whether it is the architect's job to decide about the rules, or maybe the commissioners, or maybe societies. I think we have a lot of questions. This is an audience full of architects, so they are all pro-urban, and I hope that everyone has taken a lot of questions and a few answers, and that the discussion can go on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Ricky, Burdett, and Winnie Maas, that you came to Basel. Thank you, Jacques, that you are in Basel. And I want to say that there are some books here on the authors and on the theme that you can buy. And if you're very quick and very nice, you may get a signature if you want that. Also, the Swissbau fair is free for you. There will be tickets on the exit. And also there is a small exhibit on the new Messe that was designed by Herzog de Meuron. It's on your left side on the exit. If you are interested to see this again, or some friends of you, it was recorded on www.swissbau.com and www.architekturdialoge.ch. It is a podcast, and thanks a lot also again on our sponsors, the Swissbau and Kaba. Thanks for being here for 2 hours, and we see you again with other lectures. Thanks.